Welcome, dear horror listener. You're tuning into Horror Radio, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're a long-time listener or just stumbled upon this channel, thank you for joining me for another scary tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. I've been running long haul for just over a year, splitting the driving with another guy so our loads could keep moving. The money was okay, better than the warehouse job I'd had before, but it didn't take long to learn that this line of work comes with a steady stream of strangeness. You meet people you'd never cross paths with in a regular 9-to-5. Most are harmless, some are just off, and then there are the rare ones who stick in your head for reasons you'd rather forget. My name's Chris, and this was one of those nights. We were hauling a trailer full of furniture from Springfield, Missouri, out to a drop in Henderson, Nevada. The plan was to get there late the next evening, unload, and hopefully grab a load back east without too much downtime. I'd wrapped up my shift somewhere in eastern Oklahoma, around 3 in the morning. The road had been quiet for hours, just rolling hills, stretches of dark highway, and a rhythmic thump of rain on the windshield. The only stop in sight was a small rest area tucked just off an exit. It sat lower than the highway, hidden by a strip of pines and oaks that blocked out the sound of passing traffic. The kind of place you could drive past every day and never notice unless you were looking for it. The rain had been steady most of the night, light enough to keep moving, heavy enough to soak through your cuffs if you stood still too long. My eyes were tired, and the promise of shutting down for a 10-hour break felt like relief. I eased the truck into the lot, logged out of the ELD, and sat there for a few seconds, letting my eyes adjust to the dim, orange glow of the overhead lights. There may be 5 cars scattered in the car lot. In the back, 2 other semis sat parked with their curtains drawn tight. The only sounds were the hiss of rain on asphalt and the occasional creak of branches above. I grabbed my jacket from the seat, zipped it up, and hopped out, locking the door out of habit. The air smelled like wet pavement mixed with pine sap. I was halfway to the restroom when I noticed him. Some guy sitting on a bench under one of the canopies, cigarette ember glowing faintly in the dark. At first glance, he didn't seem worth a second thought. Middle-aged, maybe late 40s to early 50s, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a dark rain jacket. His head was angled down, the cigarette balanced loosely between his fingers. He didn't look at me as I passed, but something about the way he sat, still, shoulders slightly hunched, made me walk just a little quicker. Not fear exactly, more like that low hum you get in your chest when your instincts are nudging you to stay alert. Inside, the restroom was cold in that way that sticks to your skin. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a pale, uneven glow over the cracked tile. I finished up, washed my hands, and let the dryer rattle for a few seconds before pushing the door open again. The rain had picked up a little, tapping against my hood as I stepped outside. The man was still there, but his posture had shifted. His upper body was turned toward me now, shoulders squared, his head tilted, just enough that I knew he was watching me. The light from the pole caught the side of his face, just the curve of his cheekbone, leaving the rest of him in shadow. I kept my eyes forward and headed for the truck, my pulse starting to creep up. I climbed inside, shut the door, and locked it before sliding back into the driver's seat. The radio was still on from earlier, some comedy podcast, but the jokes fell out of place against the uneasy thump in my chest. I'd barely opened a bag of beef jerky when something shifted in my peripheral vision. The bench was empty. My gaze flicked left, and that's when I saw him again, this time standing under the nearest light pole, maybe 10 feet from the passenger side of my truck. He wasn't moving. His jacket was darkened from the rain, water dripping off the brim of his cap. His head was angled forward, like he was trying to look directly into the cab. The stillness of him is what did it. No shifting his weight, no fidgeting, just locked in. I reached over and turned the radio off. For a few long seconds, the only sound in the cab was the rain and my breathing. I leaned back slightly and called toward the sleeper. "Hey." There was a groggy shuffle from behind the curtain. "What?" Mark's voice was thick with sleep. "There's a guy outside. Been watching me since I got back." The curtain rustled, and he peeked through a narrow gap. "Where?" I turned toward the light pole, but the man was gone. My eyes swept across the lot until I caught movement in the driver's side mirror. He was walking slowly toward the back of the trailer, cigarette still burning in his mouth. "He's circling around," I said. Mark pushed the curtain aside and sat up, rubbing at his face. "What side?" "Driver's side. Headed for the rear." I tracked him in the mirror until he disappeared behind the trailer. A few seconds later, his shape appeared in the passenger side mirror. He moved up the length of the truck until he stopped right next to the passenger door. Then he bent down, peering into the small lower window by the step, the one meant for checking blind spots. I slid across the seat and grabbed the folding knife off the dash. The handle was warm from sitting in the sun earlier, and I felt my grip tighten around it. Mark's eyes locked on the mirror. "What the hell's he doing?" The man leaned even closer, his head almost touching the glass. I didn't think. I just snapped, "What do you want?" Louder than I meant to. He jerked back, then craned upward to look through the main passenger window. The light caught him full on this time. He was older than I guessed, maybe mid to late 50s. Thin face, deep lines around the mouth, skin pale under the wet brim of his cap. His eyes were startlingly bright, locked on me without a blink. Mark's voice cut in, sharper now. "Can we help you with something?" The man's gaze flicked between us, and it was like something in him shifted. He straightened slowly, almost deliberately, then turned without a word and walked toward the far edge of the lot. We stayed in our seats, watching through the mirrors. For the next 30 minutes, every time a car pulled in, he'd drift toward the nearest light post and stand there. Didn't speak to anyone, didn't wave, just watched. We kept going back and forth on whether to call the highway patrol. Technically, he hadn't done anything you could pin down. No threats, no touching the truck, nothing beyond making people uncomfortable. But there was a deliberateness in the way he moved, like he was waiting for a cue. Then happened fast. He pulled a phone from his pocket, stared at it for a second, and shook his head hard, almost like he was angry. A moment later, he broke into a sprint, full tilt, toward a dark sedan parked near the entrance. The engine turned over before he even hit the seat, and he shot out of the lot, tires squealing as he merged onto the on-ramp. We sat there in silence for a while after that. Mark eventually shrugged, muttered something about people being weird, and crawled back into the buck. I stayed up. I couldn't shake the image of him standing under that light pole, rain dripping off his jacket, those bright eyes locked on the cab. I kept running through the possibilities in my head. If he'd meant to rob us, why leave the second he knew there were two of us? If it was intimidation, what was the point? And if he was meeting someone, why here, at 3 in the morning, in a rest area, so tucked away you couldn't even see it from the highway? I never figured it out. But after that night, I started avoiding those hidden rest areas. Out on the road, you learn fast that it's not always the loud, chaotic places you need to watch out for. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones where someone can stand just out of the light until they decide to move. There's a certain kind of quiet you only get at rural rest areas after dark, something in between peaceful and unnerving. I've been driving OTR for a while now, and I've seen enough of them to know that the quiet isn't always your friend. My name's Dan, and this happened on a run I took through northern Pennsylvania a few years back. I've been behind the wheel most of the day, hauling a refrigerated trailer full of produce from Ohio to New York. It was late October, right in that stretch when the air starts to smell like damp leaves. and the cold sets in faster than you think. The run itself had been straightforward. I'd started that morning just west of Columbus, skirted the Pittsburgh traffic by midday, and was pushing east on I-80 when the fatigue started creeping in. I planned to make it another 50 or 60 miles before shutting down, but after 8 hours of steady driving, my eyes felt heavy and my shoulders ached from holding the wheel in the same position. The road had been almost empty for the last hour. Just a few other semis blowing by in the opposite lane, their headlights flaring in my mirrors before vanishing into the dark. When I saw the blue rest area, 2-mile sign, I figured I'd take the exit. It wasn't ideal, but I needed to stretch and clear my head before I started making mistakes. I took the ramp slow, my headlights cutting through the trees. The pavement leveled out into one of those smaller, state-run stops, separate lots for cars and trucks, a squat brick building in the middle, a couple of vending machines bolted to the wall. No gas station, no food court, no bright fluorescent overhangs. Just orange sodium lights casting small, uneven circles on the pavement. I scanned the place automatically. The truck lot had 2 rigs parked on the far end, both dark with their curtains drawn. The car lot was empty. The air had that stillness you only get when there's no wind and no nearby road noise. The interstate was hidden behind a belt of trees, and without the sound of traffic, the rain tapping on my windshield sounded louder than it should have. I was just starting to swing into a spot when I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Up at the very front of the truck lot, close to the entrance, a dark SUV was sitting with its lights off. From the angle, it was facing the rest area road, almost like it had been parked there to watch who came in. I barely noticed it at first. It was just a darker shadow against the tree line, but the second my headlights swept past, its lights snapped on. At first, I figured maybe it was just another driver getting ready to leave. But then the SUV pulled forward, not toward the exit, but across the lot. It didn't take the marked lanes. Instead, it cut diagonally across the empty truck spaces, heading toward the car lot in a way that didn't make sense. The car lot and truck lot are separated by a curb and a one-way loop, so the only way to get from one to the other is to circle around the building. But this SUV just drove the wrong way into the car lot behind me. I picked a spot on the far edge of the car lot, nose pointed toward the entrance ramp, so I could see anyone coming in. My gut was already telling me something was off, but I tried to play it cool. I eased into the space, straightened out, and shifted into neutral. In my mirror, I saw the SUV roll past the open rows without slowing down. The whole lot was empty, except for me. And instead of taking one of the dozens of spots, it came right up and pulled in tight, directly next to my passenger side. Not a space away, not even far enough to give me room to open the door. They came close enough that if I'd swung my door out, it would have hit theirs. That was all I needed. Before they'd even put the vehicle in park, my hand was on the shifter. I threw the rig into reverse and backed out fast, my trailer tires chirping on the wet asphalt. I swung wide, keeping my eyes on their front end. As I passed their hood, I glanced over, and that's when I saw the driver. He was leaning toward the passenger window, head tilted like he was straining to get a look at me. My headlights hit the glass at an angle, so I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I could see his posture. Elbows braced, neck craned forward, eyes trying to find mine through the glass. Thing is, my side windows are tinted. At night, they're basically black mirrors. He couldn't have seen me clearly, but that didn't stop him from trying. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I straightened the wheel, dropped it in a drive, and headed straight for the lot's exit. My pulse was pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. The SUV didn't follow me out. In the mirror, I saw it sitting there for a few seconds before slowly reversing out of the space. Instead of heading for the interstate ramp, it rolled back toward the truck lot entrance. As it crossed into the shadows, its headlights clicked off again. That's when it clicked. They'd been sitting there before I arrived, and after I left, they went right back to that same spot, like they were waiting. I merged back onto the highway, keeping my speed steady, even though my mind was still racing. I replayed the whole thing in my head. The dark SUV, the sudden headlights, the way they cut across the lot the wrong way, pulling up next to me like they had a reason to get that close. My first thought was to grab my phone and call the state police, but the longer I pictured the conversation, the more it sounded like nothing on paper. Some guy parked next to me at a rest stop. They want a license plate number, a description. All I could give them was dark SUV, middle-aged driver. So I kept driving. For the next 20 miles, my eyes flicked between the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights pacing me from a distance. Every time a set of lights came up behind me, my chest tightened until they passed, and kept going. It wasn't until I hit a larger service plaza, one of the ones with a fuel station, diner, and a lot full of trucks, that I pulled in again. The lot was well lit and busy, a constant shuffle of diesel engines idling and people moving between their cabs and the building. I backed into a spot with trucks on both sides and kept my eyes on the entrance road as I set the brakes. The SUV never showed. I sat there for a while, the hum of other engines in the background, and the thing that stuck with me was how fast it all happened. From the moment I spotted them in the truck lot to the second I threw it in reverse, maybe 30 seconds had passed. That's all it took for my gut to tell me something wasn't right. I've told a few other drivers about that night, and the reactions are split. Half think it was nothing, half say I did the right thing by leaving. But I know what I felt in that moment. That creeping, unshakable sense that the person next to you didn't just happen to be there. I don't know what they wanted, and maybe I never will. But I don't pull into empty rest areas anymore. If I can't see another set of headlights already parked there, I keep driving. Out here, it's better to lose a little sleep than to find yourself wondering, too late, why someone picked your truck out of all the ones on the road. The news about him had differed for me. I'd seen the headline in a driver's lounge TV feed, one of those 24-hour stations that's always cycling through crime stories and weather alerts. The picture popped up alongside a bold graphic, arrest made in cold case murders. The man in the photo had graying hair, tired eyes, a mouth set in that neutral line you see on a lot of older drivers. It was the kind of face you'd pass in a truck stop diner and not remember 5 minutes later. But the name stopped me cold. I'm like, I've been on the road nearly 20 years, long enough to watch the culture of trucking change around me. I've seen old CB chatter fade in a half-dead radio silence, truck stop diners get gutted and replaced with fast food counters, and whole stretches of highway shift their traffic to new bypasses. Over those years, I've met more drivers than I could count. Some I'd share a table with, others I'd avoid without a second thought. This guy, the one in the news, landed somewhere in between. Back then, I didn't know him well. We'd cross paths in the late 2000s, usually at Midwest rest areas or small-town loading docks where you'd end up waiting longer than planned. His name was Gary. He ran refrigerated freight like me, though his runs didn't seem to follow any steady pattern. He might be in Minnesota one week, Texas the next, and somewhere in the Rockies after that. If you asked, he'd just shrug and say, "I go where they pay me." He was quiet in person, but if you gave him an opening, he'd talk. Not in a warm, friendly way. More like he was filling the silence with whatever came to mind. He liked to gripe about dispatchers, the rising price of diesel, and how people don't know how to respect the road anymore. The kind of conversation every driver's had at least 100 times. I never thought much about him at the time, though there were small things I tucked away without realizing it, like how he always seemed to know more than he should about the towns we passed through. What motel stayed half empty, which truck stops had security cameras that didn't work, where the old roads ran parallel to the interstate but kept you out of sight, or how he could guide a conversation into something personal without you noticing, asking if you had kids, if your wife ever got lonely while you were out, what kind of hours she worked. I didn't connect those dots back then. It wasn't until the arrest, more than a decade later, that any of it snapped into place. For what the report said, they got him on DNA. Not from some overlooked crime scene sample, but from something as ordinary as a genealogy site. His adult daughter, one he'd never been in contact with, took an at-home DNA test, probably just curious about her ancestry. The result pinged a distant match in a law enforcement database. Subtly, his name was in front of investigators. They didn't rush him. They followed him for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Eventually, they tailed him into a big box store in Iowa. He'd shopped, grabbed a coffee, tossed the cup into a trash can on the way out. When they pulled it, the DNA matched 3 cold cases from the early 90s. 2 young women found off highways in the West, and another woman, pregnant, left in a wooded area off a rural Tennessee road. That last part, pregnant, stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. I thought back to a night in 2009, sitting at the counter in a roadside cafe in Missouri. It was late, past midnight, and the place smelled like burnt coffee and fryer grease. Gary sat one stool over, flipping through a free trucking magazine. A young couple came in. She was maybe in her early 20s, 7 months along by the look of her. I remember him watching her longer than felt natural, not a casual glance. His eyes tracked her across the room, lingering, like he was thinking about something far away. I chalked it up to fatigue at the time. Drivers get that 1,000-yard stare when they've been behind the wheel too long. But now, replaying it with everything I know, it feels different. When a charge is hit, I read everything I could find. The 2 women from out west hadn't been identified, just placeholders, Jane Doe, Highway Doe. The Tennessee victim had a name and a timeline. Picked up hitchhiking. Last seen at truck stop. Body found less than a day later. They also said they were looking at him for other cases. Unsolved murders stretching from the Midwest to the Plains. The kind of crimes you only hear about if you keep your police scanner on during long hauls or skim the back pages of small-town papers. A convenience store clerk in Iowa, bludgeoned to death during an overnight shift. A college student in Illinois who vanished after a car broke down along the interstate. What chilled me most wasn't the nature of the charges. It was how easy it would have been to fall into his orbit. The trucking world is both big and small. You cross paths with thousands of strangers, but the same faces loop back into your route over and over again. You start to think of them as familiar, maybe even safe, just because you've seen them more than once. After the arrest, I went back through my old logbooks. I marked at least 6 times we've been parked in the same lot overnight. Rest areas off I-35, truck stops along I-90. Even a tiny municipal lot behind a grain elevator in Nebraska when the weather turned bad and nobody wanted to risk the icy highway. We'd shared the same spaces without a second thought. One night stood out. It was midsummer, South Dakota. Around midnight, warm enough that most drivers had their windows cracked to catch a breeze. I was stretching my legs when Gary wandered over from 2 spaces down. We talked idly about the heat, the next day's run. Then he looked out toward the dark stretch of highway and said, "You know, it's real easy for someone to disappear out here." I laughed, because truckers say things like that sometimes, especially when they're tired. But the way he said was different. There was no grin, no hint of a joke. He just looked at the road like it was the truth. "Nobody's watching the in-betweens," he added, gesturing at the black tree line beyond the shoulder. That sentence has echoed in my head ever since the day I saw his mugshot. The last time I saw him was maybe a year before his arrest. Lot outside Sioux Falls, chilly evening, wind cutting across the asphalt. He was leaning against his trailer, smoking, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. I get a small wave. He nodded back. That was it. 2 strangers again. Now, with everything I know, I think about how close we all run to danger without realizing it. Out here, you measure trust differently. It's not about someone's past. It's about whether they'll cut you off in traffic, whether they'll keep their distance when they park, whether they'll share their thermos with you on a cold night. You forget that the man swapping weather reports with you on the CB could be the same man in a decades-old crime scene photo. I don't know if Gary's guilty of more than the cases they've pinned on him, But I know he fit the road in a way that makes the possibility hard to ignore. Never staying in one place long, never memorable enough to be recalled by strangers, always with another town on the horizon. After his arrest, I changed the way I park. I used to pull into far corners of lots to escape the noise. Now I stick closer to other drivers, under lights when I can. It's not about living in fear. It's about staying aware. I've seen firsthand how some people use the shadows. They'll blend in until they decide not to, and by the time you notice, it's too late to wonder what you missed.